coming, everyone. On behalf of the Center for Digital Strategies, I want to welcome you to today's session. We're really excited to welcome back a good friend of the center, one of our alumni advisors and a long-term kind of contributor to the Brit Technology Impact Series at the CDS. This is, I think, what, third or fourth?
Third
time?
Yes.
Rejoining us. David Chemerow, so please join me in welcoming David. He's got some really great stuff to talk to you about today, talk to all of us about today, and should be a really, really good session. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Yep. It's a pleasure to be back here, especially before the snow hits the ground. But I've always enjoyed coming back up. I love talking about some of the stuff that I've done at different places through my career. It was fun when I was at Playboy Enterprises to talk about what we were doing then. It's fun from Rentrak and comScore to talk about what we're doing for media measurement. And what I'd like is, we've come up with what we believe is a new model for how you can really measure cross-platform in a very effective way. And that's what I'm going to bring you through. And we'll talk a little bit about very briefly about the new comScore. We'll talk about what this model is, how it works, talk about how TV and digital measurement can be done today in order to facilitate the adding value to one's ad inventory from an advertiser perspective. And then talk a little bit about what I call advanced audiences, which is a lot of additional data that is available on all of us in terms of what we're watching and why that really helps, again, from an advertising perspective. So Rentrak and comScore merged almost 2 years ago and created a best-in-class in terms of what's available out there in terms of media measurement. Rentrak had focused for a lot of years on TV measurement, and comScore had focused on digital measurement, whether it's website or phone or tablet type of measurement. And so bringing the two together brought what I would call the best of both the TV measurement in terms of the largest numbers and the digital measurement together so that you can do both and bring it all together. And this discussion will be a lot of what does it mean to be bringing this all together. So think back to the far distant past, probably about 1985. Many of you weren't born then, or were just barely born at that point in time. 1985, there were 3 TV networks. Not 4. Fox wasn't even in existence at that point. 3 TV networks. And measurement was really easy at that point. You could simply count up how many people viewed, because that's all there was. That's what advertisers had to go on, was this number of people viewed this show or viewed that show. And with only 3 shows, it was not very hard, and you didn't have a very big sample. My family was a Nielsen family back in the mid-'80s for 5 years. And at that point in time, there were 10,000 households that were used to extrapolate the entire country. 10,000 households was enough back when you only had the 3 networks, and cable was just barely beginning in terms of what it was doing. Age gender, starting in 1986, was a sufficient surrogate for how you do the measurement. And so you'd look at something like females 25 to 54, or different bands, and there were like 20 different bands of age and gender that would let you do the measurement. And it was still feasible with a 10,000 person sample in order to do this and come up with reasonable estimates. Reasonable estimates in part because a lot of people were watching the shows. When you have really small numbers, it doesn't work so well. But for really big numbers, it works great. The challenge is, times have changed. And so this is really going all the way back to the 50s. But back in the 50s, the whole family gathered together around the family's one TV set in black and white, and everybody was watching the same thing. Today, everybody's watching their own screen, and they're watching live TV, they're watching DVR, they're watching over the top, they're watching YouTube, they're watching various videos, all of this. So everybody's doing something different. And this creates much, much different measurement challenges than this kind of approach does. Now, at the same time, as we all know, digital has become a dominant form of advertising over the last 10, 20 years. But take a look at where that is. Last year, 2016, the lines finally crossed. In TV, and this is all US numbers, in TV, there's $72 billion being spent on TV ads in the United States. On a digital standpoint, the lines crossed last year, and now there's about $82 billion being spent. And digital is growing at 12%. TV, believe it or not, is still expected to grow at about 2% per year. Now, most people would say, oh my God, TV is going to dive. It is not. Even though the viewership is going down, the rates are going up. And the reason is there's very broad reach that's available with TV that you can't get with digital, meaning a lot of people are watching that same show. That makes it far harder to piece together your ad plan because you've got to piece together a lot of very small things, and this way you get a very large thing. What's also fascinating to me is the bottom line, which is digital video. So this digital is all digital. It's looking at websites, it's looking at video online, it's looking at mobile, any of that. This is just digital video, meaning TV shows on a digital device. This is growing at 14%, but look how small it is. $10 billion in 2016 versus $70 billion for TV or $70 billion for all of digital. So, and the expectations are, yeah, even at 14%, it's still not going to get that big for a while. Now, these forecasts could be wrong, but it still gives you a pretty good feeling for what the advertisers today think is going to be happening as you look at this space. And what it shows is you can't write off TV very quickly, and it's important to measure that as well as measuring the rest of digital. So I get lots of people saying, oh my God, nobody's watching TV. Well, I think the 72 billion sort of defies that. But here is a breakdown by age of how people are watching TV, and it's changed. The younger people, decent amount of live TV, a lot of mobile, and you can see a lot more mobile, 3-2 over live TV, and then contrasted with the older cohort that I'm an element of, which is a lot of live TV with only a little bit of mobile. And then those in between naturally fall in between when you look at this. And so what it also says is then there's a need to measure all of this very effectively, because if all you can measure is the TV part, you don't have much of measurement. I mean, you're losing an awful lot of what's here. And from the dollars, at least half of what we're looking at. Erwin Gottlieb is the most influential person in the ad space today. He's been the chairman of Group M, which is the largest ad agency in the world. So he's responsible for making more ads and for deciding where to place those ads than anybody else in the world. And Erwin says, I no longer want to plan separately for TV and digital, which is what's been necessary up until very recently. I want to be able to deduplicate the audiences. That is, if somebody's watching both digital and TV, count them as one person, not count them as two people, which is what had been done when you just measure the two separately. And I want to come up with ever-refined target descriptors. Both of these are really important elements, and the rest of this presentation will be talking a lot about both of these in terms of why are they important, how you do it, what the differences are, and what are the differences between comScore and Nielsen as you look at the way that this is done, because both firms have very different ways of looking at this. So comScore's got a new model for our cross-platform world, and it involves both using 21st century technology, and I'll talk a little bit about what that technology is, having near census level data. On most of the measurements, it's virtually census. And if the publishers will help, it can be census measurement, not just a very tiny sample of what's there. It's coming up with ways to deduplicate or use unduplicated audience measurements across the multiple platforms, and using what I called advanced audiences, using all these additional descriptors rather than just age and gender as you look at this. Now, why do we need it? You can just look, this little chart I think shows it very easily. Here's where everybody has been up until now: TV and age, gender. Well, what about the other four forms of viewing that I show here between desktop, mobile, over-the-top, Internet of Things? All are things that need measurement, and if you don't measure them, you're losing a lot, as well as going all the way from age, gender through the advanced audiences. The goal is to be up in the corner as you look at how do you put all of this together in a cohesive way. And that's why we call it a new model for this cross-platform world. And a part of it is there's been lots of criticism of, well, you have to choose. You can either choose to have a lot, or you can choose to be accurate with a lot less. And we don't think that's a fair argument at all. We think that you can get a lot and be more accurate with that because of the way you can bring this all together. So it's built on a lot of R&D that's happened over the last 10, 15 years. First at Rentrak, which started in 2005 with measuring video on demand, which was, that's a long time ago, and then moved through the TV measurement in 2009, local TV measurement in 10, hitting 100 million TVs that were being measured here in 2012, hitting full census, And then actually the 500's out of date. There's now over 700 TV stations that are being measured by Rentrak and that are using Rentrak or using comScore now for the way that their business is being conducted. That's 1/3 of all the TV stations in the United States are using this, and many are contracting with it, using it as a currency.
And how do you get that data? It's in the cable box, or?
It's in the cable box. So for the Rentrak, for that side of it, if you have a cable box from any of 5 providers, which would be Dish, AT&T, Charter, Cox, or DirecTV, they send every click of your remote gets memorized by that box in commercially available software. And every night they send that up to the company. And the company has figured out how to decode the clicks into what you're watching. And so therefore, and it's all anonymously, we know for cable box 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not for your household, what it is you're watching. Precisely, including when you go to the DVR, when you fast forward, it's exactly what you're seeing on the screen. And the beauty of this is that's about 80 to 90 million TVs at this point in time. And it's very easy to add additional ones on to that. And you can then combine that with all sorts of other data that you can buy from the credit rating agencies, from Polk, from other people who measure TV ownership, consumer packaged good purchases, other kinds of things, match it up anonymously, and all of a sudden you know for 100 million TV set owners what cars they own, what products they buy, what commercials they watch, or what TV shows they watch, so you can then direct the commercials to the more appropriate location. Yes?
So I'm not sure if you're going to go into it, but how do you associate those IDs?
It's done differently for TV than for digital. For TV, we do a matching process that's an anonymized matching process. So a Dish, as an example, would send their file, and I'm going to simplify this a little bit, with name, address, set-top box to Experian that does all the matches for us. We then also get from RL Polk their auto data with name, address, cars owned, because they have all the auto registration data or all the lease data for all the cars in the United States to Experian. They match them up on name and address. They throw away the name and address. The only file we see is set-top box, 5-digit zip, and all this data. So now we've matched it in a way that if somebody stole all the company servers, they wouldn't get your information. Well, they get your information. They wouldn't have your name and address. They couldn't use that information. So it's perfectly protected from a privacy standpoint, and there's no way to go back and say, I know who's in that house. But you can then look at that, and I'm going to give you some examples of how that lets you then direct ads to a house that ought to be more receptive to that ad. So that the Mercedes ad may go to a luxury car owner's house, not to somebody who's got a Prius. And I can go through lots of examples over how that can be done. On the digital side, it's done much more with tagging and with using firms like LiveRamp that enable you to match up an IP address with a household. But again, it's all fully anonymized, and there's no names and addresses unless people have given permission for their names and addresses. comScore has some panels, and they've given permission for you to track everything that they're doing. But if they put the panels aside, there's no personally identifiable information that's available there. Now on the comScore side, comScore began matching up very limited amounts, only 4 million households worth of data with desktops back in 2010 for the Vancouver Olympics, expanded on that some for the Sochi Olympics, as I've got up here, and was also doing a lot of other cross-panel work. And the cross-panel stuff is hard. One, there's a big panel, million household panel, but that's desktop. That doesn't help you on mobile. And so here, a technology called tagging is used. And what tagging involves is the publisher, be it a publisher of a website or the publisher of a TV show or other forms of video, inserts tags, single pixels, into those shows or onto those sites that when you hit it with a digital device, the tag fires off, sends a signal back to comScore that this device number, and gives the MAC ID, has hit this part of the show, meaning they've watched this part of the website, this part of the show. And that means you know, and you can now correspond those MAC IDs back to the other information you've got. And you can basically piece this all together. And what it means is comScore processes trillions of pieces of information on a monthly basis to get all of these tags when they fire off, and all of the other data that's being pulled together to try to do all the cross-panel work as you're working with XMedia that I'll describe some more, and as you're working with all these other pieces. So very sophisticated work done in a way that gives you terrific flexibility for how you do the measurement, and is somewhat future-proofed, because as things change in the future, you've got the ability to tie that into the system rather than say, oh my God, I've got to throw it all out and I've got to start over with something brand new. Now, take a look at the scale that we're talking about. In the United States alone, measure 260 million desktops. Or desktops, laptops are desktops. 190 million mobile phones, 25 million over-the-top devices. There's 1 million digital panelists, people who volunteer or who on an inducement say, you can trace every single keystroke on my computer, which blows my mind. Their data is protected, so if Social Security numbers come in or credit card numbers come in, there's a really technical process used called fuzzification. The middle digits are replaced with like asterisks or dashes or something, so that anybody seeing it once it leaves the household isn't going to be able to use it. But you've got enough that you can do your matching properly with the early ones that for a credit card number are the banks, and the last ones which can be an identifier. So attempts are made to prevent any of that information from infecting the servers and being there, because you don't want it there. You don't need it. We have 30,000 total home panelists. And I'll describe what this is, but this is measuring every single device in the home through the router. Anything that goes through the router is being measured keystroke by keystroke. And that's combined then with all of the Rentrak related data. It's actually now 80 or 90 million TV screens, 118 million video on demand screens. Anything on video on demand, 100% census is being measured here. And then 70,000 cross panelists that are actually received from Nielsen as part of an FTC settlement from their Arbitron panel. So all this data together gets brought together in order to accomplish this. Let me give you an example of why you need data this big in order to do these kinds of measurements. You start out with 23 million households that you can measure for live DVR and video on demand. There's more households than this, but this is the ones for which you've got all that data together. And this is going to be sort of additive as you go across to the right. If you say, okay, and with those households, I want those that I can also measure the PCs for. Well, now you only have 2.4 million households. A lot of these fall away because it's hard to combine the IP address with the household. But you have 2.4 million. If you now say, okay, in addition to those PC households, I want those with mobile, you're down to 1.6 million who can measure. If you say, and I want them all to be adults in the ages of 25 to 49, you're down to 700,000. And kids in the home, for 100,000 in total. Household income of over 100,000, 90,000. And if I insist on only 3 people in the home, I have 17,000 left. So think of that. We started with 22 million. We ended up with 17,000. Yeah, 17,000 is a lot of households for your measurement. So it's enough to have statistically valid measurements when you do this. Now imagine that you're overworking at Nielsen. The number you're going to start with here is 40,000. Think of how fast that falls away and where in the middle it goes to 0. With that 40,000, there's only about 5,000 that earn over 100,000 in total. And by the time you do all these other breaks, you're down to zeros. And so one of the benefits of these very large numbers is you rarely have the zero cell problem, which is you're doing a measurement, you don't have anybody there. Nobody fits your criteria, and then what you have to do is basically, I can't measure it. Where here, there's enough that you almost always can measure everything. Yes?
So going back to the group and chairman's sort of initiative about getting even more targeted data. It's like, it seems like from where I worked in, the next step is then getting behaviors. Like we want household incomes that then are sports fans. And like the next step of this is to continue pushing towards these continued cells that are still pushing the zero cell information we're making decisions.
Well, but we've got most of that already. And so we've got sports fans, have behavioral data, have all that kind of stuff that is matched in to these 22 million. And so when you say these 22 million, most of them are carrying all of this information about them with them. So that now, if you say also 3 household families that are sports fans, it may only be 3,000 or 4,000.
Yeah.
So look, at some point, you end up cutting it down. You also can release some of these variables if you choose to. And so part of it is trying to figure out, okay, what's most important to me? Because if I come up with all these specifications, I can come up with, well, there's only one person or two people in the United States who can match that. Well, that's not what you're trying to do. As an advertiser, you want to come up with a decent number. So either you can advertise to those people, or you can use them as sort of a look-alike to say, okay, if I think of these and where they watch, I can pick up a lot more, because I'm only starting with this number. I'm not starting with the 150 million people who may be watching TV in the United States.
But it's part of what you're saying is that the behavioral data is kind of generic. It's, you got it on all 23 million.
Yeah, yeah. So because basically we're buying it for all of them, and you're matching it up against your entire set. So you don't have it on every single one. I mean, incomes are probably only had on 80 or 90% of them. Sports is probably had on, 70, 80%. But I mean, but an awful lot of it will have that data as you look at it. And it goes all the way from cars owned, products purchased, usage, preferences. Some of this information comes back from warranty cards you fill out when they say, oh, tell me about your interests. And they use that to sell to these various agencies that then it associates with your name. And so it's this data is out there, and we have enabled it to be out there by giving it up very readily. So it's not just about the big data, but towards your point, it's how you choose to use it. And there's a number of principles we've got here over how you try to put this together. You obviously want to leverage your best data sources. So as an example, there are 6 places you can buy auto data in the United States. We use one of them. We think that one's the best. Different people could argue and use different ones, but there's a lot of people out there. J.D. Power, RL Polk, Axiom, Experian, all sorts of people have different kinds of auto data. Because you just go to the DMVs and you buy it, and you can get it. But you then have to figure out which ones are really going to do the best for you. You have to then also take a look at how you handle your multiple platforms and how you can use this data to help unify across those platforms. We talked already about flexibility for more platforms in the future and the ability to apply more data as you get towards this. So I mentioned before the total home panel. And it's a router-like device smaller than your router that you can plug into your router. You recruit people for a panel. Got 30,000 people today in panels for this. And what happens is you plug in your device, you then register all the other devices in your home. And with that, every single thing you do on any device in your home is able to be seen by comScore. Now, you get paid for this, but that's the trade-off for this. And it includes all the mobile devices, PC devices, set-top boxes, home theater, consoles, streaming devices, IoT, your Nest thermometer, your Apple Watch, all these kinds of things can all use the router to some extent, and by doing that, they're then visible in this fashion. And with 30,000, it gives a good number for being able to extrapolate that and use that in different ways. The company's working on ways to measure and can measure, sort of measures in the lab right now, what people are watching on Netflix. It's not right now cell data based on how much time is spent on Netflix versus Roku versus various other kinds of devices, but the data on exactly what show is still in the lab but is expected to come out, and doing that by basically finding in the headers what the show names are in a way that is very definitive over what's there. Yes?
So earlier this fall, Verizon, AT&T, all the ISPs basically now have the ability to sell that data and sample it. So is that something that could substitute to solve the Netflix, Amazon, Hulu kind of content problem?
You know, it's interesting because it's a problem, but it is not that great on a commercial basis, because the only people who are really interested in that data are show producers. If ads aren't sold on the show, advertisers don't really care whether you're watching any of the Netflix shows.
The producers have all the fine-grained data anyway.
Well, they really don't. Netflix won't give them as much, but they can buy some. But okay, so how much of a product are you going to do that's going to have five or six purchasers? It's more for bragging rights, or but it is useful for some of the ones that do have commercials on there to be able to basically trace what's going on within these shows. But it's people have said, oh, you can make a lot of money with it. And okay, so how much is Warner Brothers going to pay you for this one? If they really squeeze Netflix arm, they can get some of it. Okay, they're not going to pay you $10 million for it. You know, it's not enough to really make this super worthwhile. This is a graphical representation of how much of this data is out there within these households. 90% of US households have Wi-Fi. So that's sort of the universe we're starting with. And of those 90%, 90% have computers. So in the 65 to 90% are the various digital forms. Over the top is in the 1/3-ish type of range. And the Internet of Things is in the really small, just beginning range in terms of based on comScore's data of what's being measured. One of the reasons why it's really clear you need to do a lot more mobile measurement is YouTube. 70% of YouTube viewing right now is mobile. If you can't measure mobile really well, you've got a problem. And comScore is able to measure mobile both on an unsecure basis and on a secure basis. So if you're doing things on your mobile phone that's either on a secure app or are on your browser, Safari or whatever your browser is, in a secure basis, comScore is still able to measure that. And that's a huge differentiator from anybody else in the marketplace. Yes?
David, I'm just curious, where do iPad tablets fit in your division there of those two?
They
Would you
would
consider
be
them-
mobile.
They're in mobile?
Yeah,
Okay.
laptops would be considered desktop, but the other ones are mobile.
Thanks.
How do you guys think about emerging data sources, like Amazon Alexa sitting in the living room, and now listening to everything you're watching, presumably being able to manage it?
Right.
Is that something that you try to access? Is that some gold mine for Amazon? Is that something that's untouchable?
I think it's going to be somewhat untouchable because I think that most people are going to be very wary of how that data is mined. You know, I've read lots of articles and blogs of people who are very concerned of, oh my God, what could I be saying in the home? Or what could they be hearing in the home and how is that going to be used? But it's a great question because Amazon technically could use it, although I think their terms of service say that they won't use it. But terms of service can be changed very easily. It does not take a whole lot to change that in a different kind of fashion. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops and what's really done with it. Currently, none of those people, the Googles, the Amazons, the others who have that kind of device have been trying to monetize that data. That could change. And you probably need a little more penetration to make that worthwhile. Yes?
Maybe an tangent to that, what do you think about face recognition being implemented in more and more devices? And is that something that you would be happy to see the attention towards one screen opposed to another?
You know, it's a really interesting question because a part of this also has to do with just what are the regulators and what is Congress going to think about any of these kinds of things? And can you get caught up if somebody else abuses what's thought to be an abuse and the new law or regulation is written so broadly that it sweeps you into it? So as an example, comScore is not affected by any of the things, or not even close to the line on any of the stuff it's doing. But you can easily imagine that if somebody abuses enough of what's going on, and think of just all that's happened with Facebook and Twitter and all of that, that new rules are written that could affect you. So the company's desire would be everybody else act as good as possible so that Congress or anybody in Washington is not incented to start dragging a really big net here, but it's something that the company doesn't have a whole lot of control over and is not a big enough player to really influence things much themselves. Now the good news is all the ISPs, all of the cable companies are all from the standpoint of they do not want to see more regulation placed upon them. So that's helpful in terms of they will do a lot of lobbying to prevent that from happening. But you never know what's going to happen. Or if some bad enough abuse happens, there will be a counter reaction to it. So there's 4 elements that I want to talk about in the next couple of slides in terms of the model. We'll talk about how the individual platforms are measured on a granular level, talk about how you unduplicate, deduplicate the reach, more on the advanced audiences, and I'll give you some examples, and then a little bit more on addressable, which we really haven't talked about yet at all. So when you take a look at how viewing occurs, it's really varied. So here, this is from February 2017, CNN, of how people access CNN. As it says, total reach was 175, and this is deduplicated reach, was 175 million people age 18 or older during the month of February 2017. If you add up all 3 of these vehicles, it's 221 million. So there's a lot of duplication. That is people who looked at CNN on their desktop and also watched the TV, or looked at it on their mobile, or whatever that was. And you can see in here in the middle, the numbers of overlap, and these are not trivial. It helps you understand why advertisers want to understand these figures so that they can deduplicate, because they're trying to say, I want to reach a certain number of people. And if in reality they're reaching 221 million people or 175 million people, they may choose to advertise less or optimize their ad to hit that right. And they know they may not be hitting that as broad a reach as they thought they were going to have if it's only 175 and not 221 million. And I'm going to give you some other examples of, okay, what does it mean when you start taking a look at those various divisions? This is another cut at this, and that is now looking at this over time and how the reach builds. And when you take a look out here at TV is in the 50, 55% type of range. And when you add on the unduplicated additional reach, you bring yourself up to about 70%. So if you go back a couple of years ago, when people weren't combining the two, were only looking at them individually, if you bought for TV, you were missing an awful lot of the rest of what your ads could be doing if you're on the other medium. Where here, it brings it together. So you've got to decide what do you want to do with it, but you've at least now got the data so that you can do all of that. The industry is also helping with this move towards the advanced audiences. And this is an example of Turner, Viacom, and Fox coming together. And this was very big in the news, back maybe 6 months or so ago. Viacom started buying the advanced data from Rentrak back 2 or 3 years ago. And last year sold $1 billion worth of ads using these advanced audiences. So let me give you an example of what this means. Typically an advertiser on a Viacom, think of it as a lot of young male shows, would come in and say, okay, give me a guarantee for young men 18 to 24, and if you deliver the right number of young men, I'm satisfied, and I don't get a guarantee. I don't get a rebate, basically, or additional free ads to bring me up to that number. What we ended up doing was giving them enough data, including credit card data, that would let them go to a Taco Bell or any other restaurant or chain of restaurants and say, if you buy this ad, we'll make sure that your revenue is flat or up during the measurement period, as opposed to the number of people. So it's guaranteeing an outcome, not guaranteeing the input. And could do that through credit card receipts, MasterCard, Visa, whatever those credit card receipts are. And you have to do some extrapolations, but you can do it in a way to say, here's what the data was in the past, here's what it is now. We got to check over the ad to make sure that's a good ad, because if it's a crummy ad, we're going to give you enough free ads until your revenue hits whatever guarantee level that we set.
This is Viacom speaking.
Yes, this is Viacom speak. And this was really attractive to Viacom's advertisers. And if you were reading a lot of the trade press, you would know that Viacom has had some real problems selling ads in the last year or so. Well, this makes it a whole lot easier when you're selling an outcome instead of just selling an input, because you know as a customer, you're going to get what you're looking for, or you're going to get enough free ads that you will get yourself up to what you're looking for.
So Facebook's done this also, I think, and what's the feedback loop that they're kind of closing the loop on the point of sale data or the credit card data? Who's the intermediary?
Yeah, we have a lot of pieces of that loop. So another great example would be one of a tax preparer. We did this at Rentrak about 3 or 4 years ago. We basically said, put your ad on TV. We'll measure which households viewed the ad. We can then measure, and we even did this at Rentrak without all the comScore assets, we can measure when they went to your website. And then we can also measure, did they actually buy when they were on your website? At comScore, it's far easier, far better stuff to make that happen. So we can complete the entire feedback loop, which is the holy grail of advertising, is knowing, was your ad effective or not? Here you can say your ad was effective. Now, for some products, it's much harder to do. For tax preparation software, you're not going to see ads in a ton of places. So you can attribute it to that TV viewing. Imagine advertising a car. How many hundreds of places are cars advertised between brochures and radio and TV and lots of different, you got tons of places. Which ad was responsible for this? It's hard to get the feedback loop right, but for more simple things, it's very straightforward to do that. And a lot more of advertising is going to move in that direction because the advertisers want to know, did that ad actually work? Because if it did, I'll pay for it. Yeah.
So you must then have a lot of A/B testing set up so that you can answer the more complex question of, in a world of noise, how do you tease out?
Yeah, we do some of that, but not a lot. the customers do a lot of that. And they're much better set up, they and their agencies, in order to do all the testing. Many of them will test multiple forms of the ad anyways to say which one's going to work best. Well, we can, from those tests, work them through on the rest of what that feedback loop is with it.
How do you interact with things like Facebook, right? So you've got all this visibility on video watching.
Yeah.
Traditionally. Facebook has their own visibility. Where does that get combined, and how does that affect the kind of guarantees people are making?
Facebook will let comScore and Nielsen see what's going on Facebook. And so they will share their data, including a lot of their demographic data. And for them, the demo data will mean age and gender. It's not going to mean all the other fine things. We may be able to tie those other fine things into that.
But they're not giving that to you, even though they have it.
That's correct, because they're trying to protect the privacy of their individuals. In Nielsen's case, it goes even further because they've agreed with Nielsen that Nielsen can give them a name and address of any individual in the world, and they will give them back what the demo is for that individual, which is nice. comScore's had to get there by using other sources, use Spotify, use a whole variety of other websites, and you can piece together the same kind of thing. But Nielsen got to Facebook first, and they had an exclusive with them where they get this, and it makes it very easy for them to just submit something and get it back. Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about Facebook in the sense that I know a couple years ago they kind of closed the garden on a lot of their data, used to be more open like Google, and like a lot of the growth now is going towards Google and Facebook in digital ad tech.
Yes.
So, like strategically in the longer term, how are you guys viewing that closed garden ecosystem, and what sort of relationship ideally would you like to try to build there?
Well, Facebook is one of what you can easily call the gorillas. They do what they want to do, and you try to persuade them to do a little bit more that's helpful to you. And sometimes you're successful, and sometimes you aren't successful. And the same thing's true with Facebook, Google, Snap, you name it. The big guys out there have the power to do what they want to do. Facebook realized, especially after all the problems they've had in the last year and a half, where they've had bad data disclosed, which they disclosed, that they're better off getting more third-party firms involved. And a lot of advertisers, including the fellow who's the CMO of Procter & Gamble, went to Facebook and said, if you guys don't get more third-party advertisers involved, we're pulling our, what is it, $300-400 million a year of ads away from you, and we'll put it somewhere else. We don't need you. Nice to have, we like working with you, but unless you get third parties involved so we can trust your data, we're gone. And I think I gave them till the beginning of 2018. I think about a week after that call, comScore got the call to say, maybe we can do a little more work with you. And so there's been more work going on. So some of this will be the push-pull of, depending on what's going on with events, more data will be shared. And it doesn't hurt them at all to do so. And if it helps their customers, it's like, well, then why wouldn't you want to do something that will help your customers and not hurt you as you look at this? Yes?
Payment gateways such as Visa and MasterCard have massive data sets, and that spans industries. So
Yes.
for example, they could see somebody who's buying a lot of soccer game tickets, and accordingly that's a customer segment. So would you say that it's better for these firms to sell the data or make products out of them and then give the customer segment, say, to other firms to target? What would be best for them?
I think best for them is to sell the data and basically make some money on it and let somebody who really knows what they're doing monetize it with some share going back to them. So I don't want to talk about specific deals, but there are data providers who may get revenue shares. There are data providers who just get paid a fixed amount of money for selling their database, and the better quality database you have, you can negotiate for more money for it. So if clearly Visa could get out there and try to do it themselves, they're going to have to learn a lot of things to do this well, and you're going to get a lot more value if you combine it with a lot of other information and give something far more holistic than simply saying, okay, I've got this piece of it. So as an example, comScore does work with some of the people who sell movie tickets. So it can know more about the movie ticket buyer. So you want to know, who bought tickets for horror films? You can get that kind of information and then sell that to the advertisers who want to advertise before those horror films in the movies, so they have a better idea of who's actually sitting there in the auditorium. Because otherwise it's very hard. You buy tickets for cash, can't do anything about people who buy it for cash, but you buy for credit card, there's no easy way to do that association. You can do it through those firms that sell the tickets. So there are ways that as data providers work together, they can benefit and still show the consumer something that's probably more appropriate to what they want. Then nothing, in my mind, nothing worse than watching a lot of ads that I could care less about. At least if it's a little bit of interest, you can pay a little bit of attention to it, as opposed to saying, oh my God, I'm seeing an ad for this car that I wouldn't ever dream of setting foot in. That doesn't do me any good. So with this, I was talking about Viacom doing this. What Viacom found was it's so complicated to sell this kind of approach, what I talked about with the Taco Bell, that they said, you know, we're better off if we bring more networks in with us, because then the advertisers can't ignore us. If everybody was selling that way, well, the advertisers would have to learn how to do this. So they brought together Fox and Turner. So together, they got a good share of the market, and they formed a venture called OpenAP, which will let them sell on a data-provided view, and comScore is basically the only provider of that data to OpenAP, so that they can then buy ads of whatever form they want that are using data as opposed to simply using age and gender. If you want to use age and gender, you can just buy from Nielsen. You don't need to go this other way. And they're also now trying to get other networks to join in with them so they can make this a bigger and bigger venture, because again, it's good for everybody the bigger that this gets. And clearly it's good for comScore to the extent that that becomes bigger as well. Now, here's one example of what you can do with this kind of data. Here are 3 programs, and you obviously have different levels of viewing for age and gender ranges. You're married with children, likely to buy an SUV, and income or credit worthiness. And you can see in this example, this one's pretty clear. If you're trying to sell SUVs, you're going to buy program number 3, the gold one, because that's where more of the buyers are. Let me give you another example that I don't have a pretty slide for, but I've used a lot with investors as we talk about it. Imagine that you're a Mercedes dealer and you're selling C-Class Mercedes. How do you do it with Nielsen? You have to say, well, what's the age and gender of my buyer? Well, age and gender, I don't know what the age and gender is for that. 35 to 54 men and women? Okay, that's a huge swath of the United States population. What fraction are going to buy that Mercedes? 1%, 2%? I mean, it's tiny. You're going to have a lot of wastage from all these people who don't fit that spec. If you're doing it with the comScore data, the salesperson would ask the dealer, okay, tell me with the profile of your person. And he'll say something like, oh, it's 35 to 54-year-old making more than $100,000 a year, who either drives a luxury car now or who leases a luxury car. And their lease would be up in 6 months. So I can basically work on them by the time their lease comes up. When you do that, what we found was the fraction of the population that are prospects doubles from doing it just on an age and gender basis. Doubles. This is like going to a fishing hole and you have twice as many fish, you're going to catch more fish. They find is their showroom visits are twice as many as would otherwise be the case. Auto dealers love buying data, love buying ads on that basis, because it will direct them to a show that you can't look at and intuitively say, oh, that's the show they're going to watch, but the data shows that is the show that people with those characteristics, or more people with those characteristics, watch than otherwise. And you can do that through all sorts of, we have hundreds, thousands of data categories. And it comes down to how well can you decide who your target customer is. And it's a very, very effective way to sell that. Now, this ties in, though, to where is the future of advertising going? And as many of you know, programmatic has really taken over in digital display ads. And it's gone from, it was $17 billion in 2015, it's expected to be $38 billion, more than doubled in 2018. Take a look at addressable TV, because in a way you can say that's sort of like programmatic. So for programmatic, in that millisecond that you go onto the web page, but before it fully shows on your screen, they decide who you are, who's bid the most, and people are bidding during that millisecond, and they slap the ad in that supposedly is going to be more appropriate to you. That's why you see all these ads for places you've been on the internet. I went to look at some shoes on the internet. These shoe ads are going to follow me around for weeks as they continue to try to get me to look at that. It's coming through the programmatic ads. Well, addressable, there's a small number of addressable homes in this country that is homes for which the cable operator can send an ad specifically to your household. All of Dish, all of DirecTV, and most of Comcast is available for this at this point. And Charter is trying to get there. So more and more people are going in this direction. Well, it hasn't added up to a lot. It was $1 billion in 2016. That's $1 billion compared to $70 billion. Well, why? One, it's hard to sell, because if you're going to do that, what ad are you going to put on those other households? But as an example, my Mercedes example, you could send that Mercedes ad to just those addressable households. And the rate you're going to get is far higher than what you normally pay. A normal ad, TV ad, you pay $20 to $30 per thousand. An addressable ad, you probably pay $1,000 per thousand. So about $1 a household. But you're getting exactly your target. And you'll also know, did they watch, or with our type of measurement, you'll know, did they watch that ad or not? Because they could have surfed it, maybe in the right household, but they may have surfed away during that ad, or fast forwarded or whatever, and they never actually saw it. So while this is expected to increase, it's still not expected to be a whole lot any time soon. But the key here is, how effective are these ads? So as you move from non-targeted digital, which is just, I'm going to slap an ad up on the internet, to basically addressable digital, where I'm putting an ad up based on those characteristics, and now we're also assuming they're all viewable, which comScore can do to make sure that the ads are viewable as opposed to they're below the fold, or they're fraudulent, or something else of the sort. You just about double the value of the ad, the effectiveness of the ad. And this was from a three-month analysis of, did people buy after they saw the ads? Well, TV is already more effective than this addressable digital, because TV ads are really effective medium. Imagine how big that can be if you go to addressable in TV and you're sending it one-on-one to the person you want. Now, I'm not saying all advertising ought to go there, because parts of advertising is more aspirational. So take my Mercedes dealer. He wants some of those ads to be relatively broad, because he wants to convince people who can't afford a Mercedes today that in 5 years when they can, they want that Mercedes. They're going to drool for it. They're going to be ready for it. So part of your spending has got to be getting yourself ready for the future. But part of it is, I got a sale this weekend. I want to make sure my target is seeing that sale for this weekend, or else they're not going to come in. So you have to do that kind of mixing. And here too, you won't have everything be addressable, but there's room for a lot of expansion here and a lot more effectiveness as you take a look at that. Yes?
How much are these results influenced by, I would imagine, the fact that so much more TV is being consumed via DVR, where people just skip through commercials?
Well, let's talk about the facts there. About 50% of US households have a DVR. Blew me away. I thought it would be 80 or 90%. 50% have a DVR, and of those, only 60% or so skip the commercials. Also surprised me. Now, my wife controls the remote. She does a lot of knitting in front of the TV set, and sometimes she just isn't paying enough attention to fast forward through the commercial when it comes up. So you're seeing it. So there's that, and then there's also live sports. Or if you're watching live sports, you're not going to be, you may surf away, but you're not going to be fast forwarding during live sports, unless you choose to go into your football game 40 minutes late so you can squeeze out the commercials as you go through it. But so it isn't clear in terms of what's happening there. But that's all seen in any of our ratings would measure whether you actually saw the commercial or not. So the Nielsen ratings are typically based more on the show and the average minute in the show, where the comScore commercials are based on, you can have it be based on the exact commercial minute. Did you see that commercial? And if you didn't see it, you're not recorded as having seen that commercial.
Unless it's your wife.
You who would be recorded as seeing the commercial, not necessarily comprehending it. Now, deep down, psychologically, she probably comprehends it. She just chose, unfortunately, to watch it. Yes?
What do you think about more and more options to opt out of advertising? For example, YouTube Red, Twitch, or even AdBlock?
It's an interesting concept. And what they're clearly saying is, our customers don't want to watch these commercials, or don't want to watch commercials that are not relevant. And they're going to go somewhere else if we force them to. And that's why the commercial loads have been starting to come down some. And even on TV, it's expected to come down some. I think it's a great experiment. The issue is, do they bring in enough money to keep their operation going? And that's a trade-off they've got to look at. But when you look at some of the cable networks have been extremely greedy and have got commercial loads up to 17 minutes per hour. I mean, just massive, massive loads. And then you look at some of the ones that are viewed more over the top are doing one commercial per half hour, 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So there's a huge gulf here. And the question is going to come down to, what is the TV economic model? And are you bringing in enough commercial time to make that worthwhile? Because most of us don't remember the reason we have free TV is we've all agreed to watch commercials. And if we all say we don't want to watch any commercials, then we may end up having to do more like all the over the top and pay for that. And so many millennials have said, oh, I want to get rid of my cable subscription and go over the top. If you add up what you're probably paying to watch, it's probably more than, and it's a lot less convenient than cable TV. Because the package, well, for some individuals it isn't, but especially if one's in a family with several people with different viewing interests, you add up a couple of over-the-top sources plus your internet, which is going to be priced a whole lot higher because you aren't part of a package. Many people find it costs them more money.
I thought it was only if you watch live sports. And so basically that's like the differentiator of whether or not it's worthwhile in terms of the package. Is what I had heard in terms of like a lot of the other channels and the total package helps subsidize the cost of the live sports.
It does, but here's the problem. If you decide I want Netflix, and I want Hulu because I get a variety of other TV shows with Hulu, and I'd like to have CBS All Access so I get whatever it is. Many people will all of a sudden say, okay, I've got 4 packages. Okay, that's $40 or $50, and then I'm going to add on top, and you just start adding pieces together, and the pieces start to approximate the cost of your cable subscription.
So from your perspective, you can either see this as a problem because ad volumes are going to go down, or as a big opportunity because addressable matters so much more that any minute of advertising needs to matter.
It's funny because in a way, it doesn't matter what I think or the company thinks. These trends are happening. And you present the data. I think the market's going to be there. I think TV is going to be around for a long time, and ads are going to be around for a long time. People are going to want to be more efficient. So there's going to be a lot of demand for it. So the question of whether the addressable market is $2 billion or $2.5 billion, if your revenue from this is $300 million, doesn't matter a whole lot. In terms of what that addressable market's going to be, it's big. You have a lot of opportunity. You can sell a lot, and I'm not fixating over exactly how big can that market be. I've had some investors who are really concerned about that third decimal point, and it's like, guys, it just doesn't matter. If the trend is right, you go with the trend. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the ad volume, if you're doing addressable TV, you can actually have many fewer ads that people don't mind as much, and you have order of magnitude more revenue per ad.
Yes,
So that's
exactly.
Actually, you kind of get best of both.
You get the best of both, other than against that Mercedes ad, that TV station or network has got to sell another ad. So for every ad you're selling, you got to sell 2. And you got to sell one where they don't mind that this group has been creamed out. And you now got the rest. Now you might say, okay, well, let me find a Ford Focus, because that's enough of an opposite that I'm not looking at. So I mean, there are ways to do it. But if it was hard enough to sell one ad, you now got to sell another one with parallel characteristics. Which is why addressable has been slow taking off.
It's the operational challenge.
It's a lot of work.
The APIs and connecting it and getting it automated.
But of also the salespeople, because every salesperson's got to sell twice as many ads to make that work. So I think it's coming, but it's just it's not easy, because it's hard enough to get salespeople to sell one ad, much less to get them to sell 2 at the same time that are complementary. Yeah, which is people. Yeah. So another quote from Gottlieb. He's looking, with cross-platform data, he's expecting ad spend to increase, including across television. So here's another guy saying, hey, TV is still really important. Now, he's biased. He makes a lot of money off selling and making TV commercials, but he's telling the world he thinks that better cross-platform measurement is going to enable TV to do even better. Another slide that talks a little bit more about the Fox Turner, Viacom, but here's even NBCU, who said they're going to spend $1 billion on data that's much more refined than what Nielsen offers. So there's a lot of people out there saying, we got to do this. And we may not know exactly how we're going to do it yet, but we have absolutely got to do this. So briefly on this idea of the cross-platform, XMedia for comScore combines TV viewing with any form of digital. Think of it as random access digital. It could be just going to a website, and you can combine the two. And the key is, what's the crossover point? And this is going to be brought out to local markets fairly soon as well. And the crossover points, you can think of people having a lot of different strategies for how they want to look at this. Somebody could just say, I'm interested in the whole pie. Okay. Or I just want TV viewers who don't have mobile or desktop. Or I'm mostly concerned about people who can see it both ways. I mean, lots of different ways to look at this, and depends on your strategy, depends on what you're trying to accomplish. You get the data that you can choose to make that happen in that fashion. So in summary, we take a look at measurement, and it's got to lead the way in how people are consuming content. Because if you can't measure it, you're not going to be able to sell to it. And that's really vital for the whole ad ecosystem as we look at it. Multi-platform is a reality now. 3-4 years ago, we were saying, oh, it's coming. It's here. It's a major part of what's there. And comScore's got a new model for how they're doing this, how they're bringing this together, and why it makes sense. And it's being responded to very nicely in the marketplace. Any additional questions? Yes?
I had a question back on slide 27. It might be easier to see this. It was just around that Mercedes,
Yep.
to run with that example, or whatever luxury SUV. So say, just for the sake of argument, if there was that program 3 that also had a high index for something that's a lower price point, like whatever, like hockey equipment or something, how would they figure out, I mean, is there sort of other dimensions that you would apply to that to figure out whether, even if that was true for a hockey company, they might not want to buy on that program just because Mercedes is bidding it up, right?
Well, what I didn't say for all this is the computer software looks at the price and looks at the price per target is really the way you're looking at this. And so if it gets bid up, okay, then it's going to become marginally less attractive, and depends on how less attractive it is as to whether you're going to do it. So all the stuff is ranked. Every single one of the 250 or so networks that are measured is ranked. And you can look, and you may say, you know, a great example is this. comScore's had a problem, Rentrak had a problem with measuring households and not people. So therefore, it doesn't know if the male or female or kids are watching. You can still tell a lot by context. But so one customer, a cosmetic company, was looking at buying cosmetic ad, and the 2 top performers based on cost per were NFL football or Dancing with the Stars. Now initially they were all concerned of, my God, how can NFL football be the top rated for what we're looking for? Well, it may have been the guy in the household, although really 40% of all the viewers of NFL are women, so, but it still could have been the guy in the household. But you look at it in context, and you say, if you believe that more of your women are watching Dancing with the Stars, fine, the 2 are close. The fact that one was a little higher doesn't mean, oh, I got to buy the higher one. It means you're buying one that's generally better, because all you're getting here is you're not getting a universe that's all your target. You're getting a universe that's richer in your target than the other alternatives. And that's the key for looking at it. Once you get into the addressable universe, you're looking at people that are all your targets. But for the general universe, you're looking at the richness for it. Any other questions? I've really enjoyed having a chance to talk to you about this. As you can tell, I'm passionate about the subject. And I think you'll all, as you read either the general press or the trade presses, are going to be seeing a whole lot more going on with all these kinds of measurements going forward. Thank you.